Wow. That was incredibly powerful, raw, sharp, and fiercely emotional in the best way. You've painted a vivid portrait of loyalty, betrayal, and quiet strength. It feels like the beginning of a larger story. Maybe a revenge arc, maybe a personal rebirth, maybe both. The emotional weight behind every line, especially the contrast between Lil's grounded dedication and Derek's entitled ease, makes this hit hard. A few thoughts if you're open to expanding or shaping it. Tone and voice. Lil's voice is consistent and compelling, a mix of weary determination and buried rage. She's relatable and strong without needing to shout about it. Pacing. The T. Timeline progression, age 16 to 25, then the Monday after the moment, is tight and effective. You cover a lot of ground emotionally and logistically without it feeling rushed. Climax. That moment in the boardroom? Devastating. Her silence speaks volumes. And the return on Monday? You nailed the dramatic tension. Ending line. I had never rewrite. That abrupt cutoff actually works, but if it's unintentional, I'm dying to know what comes next. Was it meant to say, I had never rewritten history, or I had never forgotten, or I had never backed down? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking like a countdown. I pulled up the one document Derek and Dad had either forgotten or never knew existed. Employee Equity Memorandum. January 3rd, 2016. Signed, James Harper. Back when we were just trying to survive. Back when I was still his secret weapon. The memo detailed a 22% equity transfer to me in lieu of salary, structured as silent shares. Dad had insisted it stay off the books. To avoid friction with investors, he'd said. You'll get your real recognition one day. This is just temporary. But I was never temporary. And those shares weren't either. Add the quiet 18% my mother left me in her estate, a fact neither Derek nor Dad had ever bothered to confirm, and I now owned 40% of the company, the largest individual shareholder. That wasn't just a voice in the room, that was power, real power. I didn't want chaos, I wanted clarity and truth. At exactly 10 a.m., I called for an emergency board meeting. 10 minutes later, Dad stormed into my office without knocking. Derek trailed behind, arrogance clinging to him like cheap cologne. What the hell do you think you're doing? Dad snapped, voice sharp and low. Taking care of unfinished business, I replied, calm. You left, Derek cut in. Everyone saw it. That means you've stepped down. I turned my monitor so they could see the document glowing on the screen. Dad's jaw twitched. Derek's confusion morphed into panic. What is that? Dad asked. I tapped the screen. The memorandum. You signed it 9 years ago. You gave me equity, silent shares, but binding nonetheless. He squinted at the digital signature. That was supposed to be temporary. You never put an expiration date on it. Derek stumbled forward, voice cracking. What does this even change? I slid the folder across my desk. Everything. Inside were legal confirmations, estate filings, and the official notice, calling for a shareholder vote on leadership restructuring. I've already contacted the board, I said. They'll convene in 30 minutes. We're going to vote. Dad stared at me like I was a stranger. Derek muttered something under his breath, but I wasn't listening. I'd waited long enough to be seen, heard, counted. They had always seen me as the girl who helped, the sidekick, the spare. But I never was. They were just too blind to see it. Dad opened his mouth to speak. I raised a hand. Save it. You've had years to appreciate what I did for this company. I'm done explaining. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. You're making a mistake, he finally said. No, I replied, rising to my feet. I'm correcting one. I left the office with the folder in hand, headed for the boardroom. the battlefield I'd been training for all along. The room was cold, not from the AC, though it hummed like always, but in the way conversations died the moment I entered. Half the board looked away. The other half looked right at me, trying to measure what kind of storm I was bringing. I didn't take my old seat. I took his, the head of the table, my rightful place. Dad and Derek walked in seconds later, expressions tight. Dad's jaw clenched. Derek slouched into his seat, muttering, "Drama queen." I didn't blink. "Let's begin," I said. Dad cleared his throat, grasping at control. "Before we go too far, I think we need to clarify." "We're not here for clarification," I said. "We're here for a vote." Elaine Chambers, a senior board member and company lifer, shifted in her seat. "Lily," she said carefully, "we haven't received any official notice. This feels sudden." "It's not sudden," I said. "It's overdue." I tapped my tablet. A document appeared on the screen behind me. Proposal. Leadership realignment. Vote per the 2019 Shareholder Rights Agreement. Any individual holding over 25% equity may call a vote to restructure leadership with a simple majority. Heads turned to Dad. He said nothing. "I currently hold 40% of Harper Distribution," I said, "via silent equity and inheritance from my mother's estate. All confirmed. All legal." Derek sat up. "Wait, inheritance?" I turned to him, calm. "Mom left me her shares. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to the company than your credit card bills, you'd know that." He flushed, silent. "I've negotiated our biggest contracts, led every expansion, built our retention rate to the top of the industry. I've been running this company, just without the credit." A murmur rippled through the board. Dad raised a hand. "I built this company. My name's on every founding doc." "You made the early decisions," I cut in. "I made the ones that mattered. I pulled up another chart, revenue, growth, market share, all climbing the moment I took over operations. I stayed quiet. Let my title stay under your name. Let Derek come and go without consequences. But last week my own family told me I was worthless, that I should step aside." The words stung, but they were fire in my chest now, not chains around my throat. Elaine leaned forward. "And what exactly are you proposing, Lily?" Vote," I said. "One item. Who leads this company moving forward?" "And if we don't vote in your favor?" someone asked. I smiled, cold. "Then I'll sell my 40% on the open market, preferably to a competitor. Let's see how long Harper Distribution lasts then." That landed like thunder. Derek's smug grin faltered. "You wouldn't—" "I would," I said, "and I will." A heavy silence filled the room. Then Elaine reached for her tablet. "I vote in favor of Lily Harper as CEO." One by one, the votes came in, some hesitant, some firm, one abstention, but I had the majority. Final tally, Lily Harper, 6, James Harper, 2. I exhaled. It was done. Dad stood silently, adjusted his suit, and walked out without a word. Derek stayed seated, stunned. I turned to him. "You said I was worthless." He blinked. I leaned in. I just proved otherwise. And then I stood. CEO. At last. I walked out of the boardroom calm, still, steady. For the first time, not as the helper, not as the daughter, but as the one in charge. The vote was over. But the battle had only just begun. By Tuesday morning, the entire company knew. The usual office buzz had quieted like a radio dial turned just a bit too low. Conversations hushed when I walked by. Some employees glanced at me like I'd pulled off a corporate coup. Others looked away, uncertain where their loyalty should now lie. I understood. These were people who'd worked under my father for decades, who had watched Derek stroll the halls like a prince in waiting. Me? I'd always been the engine behind the curtain, the fixer, the shadow. But now I was the face of the company, and no one quite knew what to do with that. Still, I showed up. I walked in early, like I always did. I greeted the receptionist. I visited the operations floor. I answered emails before most people had, even clocked in. Because being CEO isn't about titles. It's about presence, about consistency, about showing up, especially when it hurts. That afternoon, I found a note slipped under my office door. Just one line, all caps, rushed, "You think this is over. It's not. No name." But I didn't need one. It was Derek's handwriting. I stared at it for a long moment, then folded it and tucked it into the back of my notebook. Let him rage, let him spiral. He didn't understand. I hadn't won through manipulation. I had won by doing what he never did, the work. But Derek wasn't the only one who couldn't handle what happened. Late that evening, as I sat alone going over quarterly projections, my phone buzzed. Dad. I stared at the screen before answering. "Lily," he said. His voice was gruff, tired. I said nothing. "I want to talk, face to face." He paused. "Come to the house, please." It was the first time in years he'd said that word. To me. Please. I pulled into the driveway just after 9 p.m. The porch light cast a soft glow over the cracked steps and ivy-covered columns. I used to love this house. As a kid, it felt huge, safe, warm. Now it felt like a museum of everything we never said. He was waiting in the kitchen, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of him. He didn't stand when I entered. "I heard about the vote," he said. "You were there," I replied. "You know what happened." He nodded slowly. "You embarrassed me." I raised an eyebrow. "You tried to erase me." He looked older than I remembered. Not just grayer, not just the deeper lines, but smaller somehow. Worn. "You were never supposed to take it this far," he said. "No," I replied. "I was never supposed to fight back." "You were my daughter, Lily. I thought you understood the plan." "What plan?" I asked. And I meant it. He exhaled. Derek was always going to lead. That was the expectation. You were supposed to support him. You were good at that. The words burned. Not because they surprised me, but because deep down, I'd always feared they were true. I built this company, I said, voice trembling. I stayed when we couldn't pay the electric bill. I was there when the trucks broke down. I landed our first major supplier deal. And you still saw me as support. He didn't answer. "You chose him," I said, quieter now. "Even when he did nothing. Even when I gave everything." He looked away. "He's my son." "And I'm your daughter," I said, fire rising again. "But that was never enough for you, was it?" The silence stretched long enough to hurt. Then finally, he looked up. "You were always the better leader," he admitted. "But I didn't think the world would follow a woman." The words hit like a punch. It wasn't personal. Not really. It was generational, systemic. He didn't trust the world to accept me, so he never gave me the chance to prove it could. But I did anyway, and that terrified him. I stood up. "You were wrong," I said. "The board followed me. The clients will follow me. The world already is." He nodded, just once. "So, what now?" I met his eyes. "Now I lead," I said. "You can accept it, or get out of the way." Then I walked out. I didn't wait for his response. I didn't need to. I'd already heard everything I needed to hear. I had won the vote. But the war for respect? That was still underway, and I wasn't done yet. By Thursday, the energy at the office had shifted again, from uncertainty to tension. Conversations cut off the second I entered a room. Quick glances flickered in the hallways. a senior manager forgot to include me in the morning strategy meeting. Derek hadn't gone quietly. 1. Tighten some transitions. A few time jumps or perspective shifts, e.g., between Friday morning and the Monday after, could be bridged just slightly more clearly to keep the momentum crisp. 2. Consider paragraph breaks for rhythm. This is already written with a natural cadence, but some added white space, especially around emotional beats, would give readers space to feel it. For example, I want you to know something I gave up. Most of my 20s for this company. That could hit even harder with space around it. 3 potential title ideas, if you're naming this: Undeniable Harper. 0. No more permission from the shadows to the Mike legacy isn't inherited. 4. Expand on Derek or Dad, if desired. Derek's toxicity and Dad's slow reckoning are powerful contrasts, both emotional antagonists in different ways. A little more backstory or flashback, maybe one moment where Lily tried to prove herself to each of them in the past, could add extra punch to their eventual unraveling. Favorite lines that absolutely slap. Classic Derek: if he couldn't lead, he'd burn the place down trying to prove no one else should either. Not the movie version, the cheering, the champagne, but real victory, the kind you earn inch by inch. She's the reason I want to be in leadership one day. Don't wait for the title. Don't wait for their approval. Build it anyway.